The first illusion. Always during those nights around the time of the great collapse, Dr. Dole, when he did eventually manage to get to sleep, was plagued by the same bad dream. They slept very little those first few nights, constantly fearful of some threat to body or soul. Well into the night, after a day filled with torment, they stayed sitting by the windows, peering out onto the little meadow, towards the bushes and the narrow cement path, to see if any of the enemy were coming, until their eyes ached, and everything became a blur, and they could see nothing. Then someone would often say, "Why don't we just go to bed?" But usually nobody answered, and they just carried on sitting there, staring out, and feeling afraid, until Dr. Dole was suddenly overcome by sleep, as if ambushed by some bandit clapping his great hand over his whole face to smother him. Or else it was like some tightly woven spider's web that went down his throat with every breath he took, overpowering his consciousness. A nightmare. It was bad enough falling asleep like that, but having fallen asleep in this hideous fashion, he was immediately visited by the same bad dream, always the same one. And this was Dole's dream. He was lying at the bottom of a huge bomb crater, on his back, his arms pressed tightly against his sides, lying in the wet yellow mud. Without moving his head, he was able to see the trunks of trees that had toppled into the crater, as well as the facades of houses with their empty window openings and nothing behind them. Sometimes Dole was racked by the fear that these things might fall down deeper into the bomb crater and end up on top of him, but not one of these dangerously precarious ruins ever shifted its position. He was still tormented by the thought that 1,000 water veins and springs would inundate him and fill his mouth with the sloppy yellow mud. And there would be no escape, because Dole knew that he would never be able to get up out of this crater by his own strength. But this fear, too, was groundless. He never heard a sound from the springs or the trickling water veins, and all was deathly silence inside the huge bomb crater. He was haunted by a third fear, and that was an illusion too. Vast flocks of ravens and crows flew in a constant stream across the sky above the bomb crater, and he was terrified that they might spot their victim lying down there in the mud. But no, the deathly silence continued unbroken. These vast flocks of birds existed only in Dole's imagination. Otherwise he would at least have heard their cawing. But two other things were not figments of his imagination, and he knew for certain they were true. One of them was that peace had finally come. No more bombs came screaming down through the air, and no more shots were fired. Peace had come, and silence reigned. One last huge explosion had flung him into the mud at the bottom of this crater. And he was not alone in this abyss. Although he never heard a sound and saw nothing except what has been described, he knew that his whole family was lying here with him, and the whole German people, and all the nations of Europe, all just as helpless and defenseless as him, all tormented by the same fears as him. But always, throughout the endless hours filled with anguished dreams, when the busy and energetic Dr. Dole of the daytime was obliterated and he knew only fear, always in these harrowing interludes of sleep, he saw something else. And what he saw was this. Sitting on the edge of the crater, silent and motionless, were the Big Three. Even in his dreams, he called them only by this name, which the war had seared into his brain. Then the names Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin came to mind, though he was sometimes tormented by the thought that something had changed there recently. The Big Three sat close together,